overwhelmingly believe that's the case. And again, faculty, you may want to take a second look at that issue in terms of saying they strongly agree or strongly agree. Next to, we don't have faculty data, but CIOs and CAOs believe faculty do strongly support this, but probably not in their classrooms, somebody else's classrooms for some of you. And senior academic leadership at my institution absolutely understands the strategic value of IT. Again, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I have been here for 4 hours. It would be inappropriate for any of you to bait me with a question about something that's going on here. I'm not going to rise to that bait. But nationwide, provosts and CIOs think that they do, in fact, in their campuses, do understand the strategic value. Faculty, not so much. So, sidebar to all this, Thomas Edison, the American inventor, we all have lived with these great aspirations. 1913, an interview with a Dayton newspaper, in terms of the great power that technology has, Edison talks about how moving pictures will supplant books in classrooms within 10 or 15 years. Now, 1913 is, what, 15 years before the first talkie? Before the jazz singer, the first commercial release? And Edison's saying moving pictures without sound will supplant books. Anything the mind's eye can see, anything the mind can imagine, the movie can show. It wasn't until the Second World War where we started using film for propaganda and training purposes, and later when Sputnik went up and for some of us new math came down. Any of you remember new math? Learning Base 2. I have distinct memories of Mrs. DeWalt, my third grade teacher in Cleveland, telling me I had to learn Base 2 because that's the way computers work. Bad choice. How many of you are mathematicians? So with due respect to the mathematicians in the room, if we had taught computers, if we had taught Base 2 as metaphor as opposed to math, more of us would have understood it, because already Morse code was ubiquitous. Zeros and ones, dots and dashes, we all got dots and dashes, making combinations. The way new math taught us Base 2 was that these were about numbers, and they weren't. But anyhow, so these expectations have been with us for a long time. So what's digital learning? Anybody have a definition? Anybody want to venture out? This does not go on your permanent record or your 360 review. That works well with other groups. This is an after lunch group, okay. So I think you need a decoder ring to understand what digital learning is. Some of you may remember those used to dive into a cereal box if you're my age to get a decoder ring. Or alternatively, the option may be to take heart in the wisdom of Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart and his 1956 decision about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. It's that ambiguous. But there are some definitions that are out there. There's the decoder ring again. The first comes from a group called Courseware in Context. This is Titan Partners, which has done some work for the Gates Foundation. Digital courseware is a solution with the potential to support student-centered learning at scale in higher education. Does that help anybody understand what digital learning looks like? No. Support new teaching and learning strategies, improve course accessibility, and drive improvements in learning outcomes for post-secondary students. Is there anybody that's against that? Does anybody understand how digital learning does that on the basis of this little snippet? No. Let's try another one. Digital courseware is instructional content that is scoped and sequenced to support delivery of an entire course through purpose-built software. Does that help anybody? Probably not. It also says that if I do just a widget lesson for one part of my course, apparently that's not digital courseware. That's something else in terms of using something. The correct emphasis here is on student learning, and your LMS is not digital learning. The LMS is a platform. It's an application. And you know what? In many ways, the LMS is dead. Get used to it. It's been with us now for 20 years. You're in the migration to Canvas, away from Blackboard. Many other campuses are doing that as well. It is largely, the LMS does a lot of things that we needed to do at this point. We throw stuff on it, we get some data out of it, we can do testing and video. And its major value to us now, for those of us who don't want to learn how to code on the web, is it's also a really interesting, unobtrusive measure of student activity. In other words, it's the equivalent of a supermarket scanner. Because we can get some sort of kind of stuff about student time on task, about how long the window is open, and their interaction with some of the materials in my widgets course, or your math, your physics, your English course, whatever it might be. But that's not an example of digital learning. That's a platform to make stuff accessible. And I think that as I think about this over the last 20 years, there's probably a sense of semantic remorse with learning management systems. Think about the title. Originally they were called course management, then they became learning management. Well, the management is on the faculty side. With due respect to those of you who are faculty, I think ultimately what we're looking for is student engagement platforms. We want something on the screen that is sticky. Learning management systems generally are not sticky. And they're platforms, we pour stuff into them, they're not sticky and they often don't engage students. Insanity, many of you know this definition. It's actually not from Einstein. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. The Einstein Institute says, in fact, it is not Albert Einstein. Higher education's best example of insanity is what John Gardner, many of you know him from the freshman year experience. John talks about gateway courses as the Bermuda Triangle. Each year, tens of thousands of students come to colleges and universities across the United States. Many of them have been very successful in high school, feeling that they are reasonably well prepared, and they run up into introductory courses and they hit a wall. Great shock to the system and their self-esteem. And then, of course, we send them back to do the math prep course all over again. We need to do better. We need to do much better for these students. Technology is a conversation about change. How many of you own cell phones? Okay, did that change your behavior when you finally got one, whenever you got one? You know, the first part was people could find you, then you did not want them to find you, right? You know, email made you accessible in ways you didn't want anybody to know that you were potentially accessible. You know, technology means you're doing something different. And there's a story in California that may be relevant to this conversation. How many psychologists in California, where I live, does it take to change a light bulb? Anybody know? Please.
Only one that light bulb really has to want to change.
Yeah, usually the California version is none. But, you know, I understand this is Las Vegas. This is a service industry, so town. So one probably works just fine in Las Vegas. But it's true. And you know what? We have good reasons not to change in higher education because things are faddish, we are risk averse. We want to know if we make changes, the change makes a difference for us and for our students. And you know, the outside consultants come in and say, well, the problem with higher education is it doesn't innovate and it needs to deal with change management. Nonsense. We do a lot of things, but we are so highly decentralized in the way we change in individual classrooms and department, often those things go unnoticed, and we are appropriately risk averse because we want to know if we make these investments, which we can't amortize when they involve a lot of money, that the investments will have benefits for our students, okay? Light bulb must want to change. To the faculty members, teaching is a high-touch profession. Let me ask the faculty here, how many of you went to college thinking, oh, I want to be a faculty member when I grow up? Anybody? We're maybe one or two, but largely ours is a recruited profession. If you look at the national data of college freshmen year in and year out, recently 0.3% of entering college students said, oh, I want to be a college professor. They have a better understanding of other kinds of careers: doctor, lawyer, dentist, business professional, accountant, veterinarian, to name a few. College professors are largely unknown unless you have a family member who's a faculty member, you live in a college town in terms of the work. So you get recruited, somebody touches you, say, well, you do physics really well. You do English really well. You do history really well. You do something really well. Come join us. And in fact, it's not a family business. Because when we look at the national data again about entering students, 0.3% say they want to be a college professor, 0.7% have faculty members who are academics. They have seen the struggles of gaining tenure and said, no, that's not for me. That usually is a good laugh line as well, I'm sorry. Okay. So we got recruited. Somebody touched us and said, you know, you can do this. And we got a lot of support. And learning is a very personalized experience. And then technology seems to make that for many, you know, well, how does technology play into being personal? I want to introduce the concept too, if you've not heard, about tech-enabled high touch. Because to me, the work that I've done for the past 3 decades, the most effective uses of technology are not solely technology, at least on the instructional side. They're technology that complement and supplement the high touch aspect. You know, we become teachers, we become faculty members because we too would like to touch others metaphorically and bring something into the lives of our students. So there is a joke in the software industry about the innovator's dilemma. God could create the world in 7 days because there were no legacy systems and no legacy users. Think about that. Think about your colleagues who are not here today. Oops, did I say that? And there are a lot of legacy systems in higher education. We don't start with a clean slate for the most part. You know, we kind of build on what we've done, we have to take it apart, we have to put it together. And this is one of the biggest challenges we confront when we talk about change. Again, what are the incentives to change? What's the compelling reason to change? And technology is a metaphor for change. So let's go to the literature. It's a metaphor for risk as well. So some of you may know this work. I'm going to kind of work through it. This is an academic work, widely cited. Technology is a means of uncertainty reduction. If you invest in some kind of technology, you want a better outcome and you want to minimize the risk of that outcome. Sometimes that may be a better product, a better resource, a better service, a reduced cost. Are any economists in the room? So any of you sit or sleep through introductory economics? Or you kind of, you know, we all kind of know by, you know, sort of by intellectual osmosis that some use of technology is supposed to make things better and cost less. Witness your phone, witness your computers over time. But we want to reduce the uncertainty. Innovation, nonetheless, creates a kind of uncertainty for what happens. And again, we want to minimize that risk. If you think about the agricultural revolutions and sort of testing, pharmaceutical drugs, reducing the risk. How do we manage this? And finally, once again, the statement about reducing the risk of uncertainty. This is Ev Rogers, perhaps known to some of you for Diffusion of Innovation. This is one of the most widely cited tomes in the social science research literature. And there's a lot that Rogers tells us about the innovation curve, which many of you have seen, even if you don't know it's Rogers. And terms that he uses about innovators and early adapters and early majority that kind of seeped into the lexicon that help explain the experience that we've had with technology in higher ed. So Rogers talks about these different groups, the innovators who are venturesome, the early adopters who have the greatest degree of influence, the early and late majorities and laggards. No laggards at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, right? It's a no laggard zone. I'm trying really hard, folks. I know it's after lunch. Maybe it's time zone. These jokes work with people on the East Coast, but maybe they're not quite as sophisticated as you are. The mistake that I think that we've made for a number of years is that the early efforts at campus work with instructional software is we invested in the innovators with good intent. Let's find the people who are self-sufficient, self-sustaining. We'll give them a little bit of resources. We'll put them on a little bit of a pedestal. They will influence the rest of us. They will be role models. They will infect. And often that didn't work out, they intimidated. Because Sue may be my departmental colleague, we may work in adjacent areas, but I don't have the skills that Sue has or the interest that Sue has in doing this. You want to go the next step down to the early adapters. They are, according to Rogers, the people who have the greatest influence. These are the people most like me. It's the difference between 2 standard deviations of cognitive distance and a half a standard deviation of cognitive distance. I can reach, but I don't have to extend too far. Can I visualize? Can I see myself doing that? We'll talk about visualization a little bit in a couple of minutes. But it's this visualization. It's who are the people closest like me that become interesting role models. And too often with a lot of campus grant programs early on, we went to the innovators and not the early adopters. And so consequently, what they were doing was interesting, but it didn't necessarily infect the rest of us. Technology is disruptive. Would any of you agree to that? Let's take a very present case. How many of you have used Blackboard for a number of years? How many of you feel your life is going to be disruptive in the migration to Canvas? No hands. Congratulations, Lori. Let me tell you, I've visited other campuses. It gets to be a little disruptive for some folks. But lots of things happen. So whether it's sort of the individual or organizational aspects, technology changes things, both organizational behavior and individual behavior. And again, it's a visualization. Can I see myself doing this? Can I make it work for me? How does that happen? And there's a 5-step process of that disruption. So first, the disruption is announced, and we get denial. I've got 10 years experience and files in Blackboard. I don't want to do that. I don't need to do that. Why are we doing that? Yeah, Blackboard is not all we would like it to be or anything else, a new student information system. But you know what? We've muddled through, we'll continue to muddle through, and why not spend that money on my project as opposed to something else, right? So we deny the need for the change. The second is anger. It arouses the inner 2-year-old amongst us, or if you're a tenured faculty member, you can't make me do that, I have tenure. That's usually gets a real laugh. This is a tough group. This is a very tough group. You know, but no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. I refuse to do that. Then we begin to bargain. Okay, I understand that Acme University is going to flip to a new LMS, and we've all got to be prepared ahead of fall opening on August 15th. My unit can't do that. So you guys go ahead. We'll catch up Thanksgiving. We'll have it done by the time everybody comes back from the Thanksgiving recess. But, we found we needed a little more time. So, January, I promise, we will be up January 10th when the students come back for the next term, and that bleeds into Valentine's Day, which, sort of bleeds along the way. We continue to bargain. Then we get depressed because we realize we have no choice. Forces in our universe have said, you will do this. And finally, it's followed by begrudging acceptance. Does this seem familiar to any of you? She nailed it about both big issues as well as small issues, Kubler-Ross, in terms of what we experience individually and organizationally with these issues, about the disruption level of technology. And one of the challenges we have is we in the IT community on campuses have not done a good job of conveying the value of what technology does. These are from national surveys I've done of provosts and CIOs. When we ask them, how would you rate the effectiveness of your campus IT investments on a scale of 1 to 7, not effective, very effective, the top scores of 6 and 7, all the years, all the time, all the hours, and all the money, and the best we can do is 50% say very effective on campus, 40% for online instruction, lower numbers for our administrative systems, and look at the one that's lowest. What have you been talking about lately? Analytics. Analytics coming over from the corporate and consumer market will save higher education and finally give us insight about how we can operate better. Not a lot of faith in the current investments in analytics on the part of campus leaders, IT leaders, and academic leaders. We have not done a good job of conveying the benefit and the value of our investments. And I would argue that the key campus tech issues have very little to do with technology anymore. Remember the religious wars? Mac versus PC? How that used to define, none of you of course, but some of your colleagues, and the conversations that led to about your PC person versus a Mac person. It doesn't matter anymore. The web has solved a lot of that. The infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, obviously at many campuses it needs to get better, but that's not where the real issues are any longer. The real issues are the people, the programs, the planning, the policy, the silos that we all live in or don't. Sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's a sense of IT entitlements. Witness the conversation at many campuses, again, I don't know that that's here, about wireless bandwidth for students. Wireless emerged and internet access for students emerged because it was supposed to support academic work. Of the 20, 30, 50 gigabytes of data that students who live in the dorms here access each week, how much of that do you think is academic work and how much of that do you think is Netflix and Amazon Prime? But that's an entitlement. That's what they signed up for and that's what you provide. And some campuses are saying, well, do we tax high users? What do we do about that? Because that's sucking up a lot of stuff as opposed to 3D imaging, other kinds of high bandwidth applications. The question is, again, how do we make it compelling and how do we make it safe for faculty? My argument, we have to provide evidence. Not epiphany, not opinion, but real evidence that this stuff works. Recognition and reward for faculty. We don't do this. I spend a fair bit of my time over the years going to what I would flippantly but respectfully characterize as show and tell days. Acme College wants to highlight the 6 or 10 faculty members who got summer grants or release time to do a digital learning project. So I come in and I do my death by PowerPoint, a little different than this one. And then there's a coffee break, and then 10 people each get 15 minutes. We used to call that a Warhol unit. Now it's sort of a TED unit, 15 minutes. And there's a structured outline. So tell us what you did, tell us how it worked. Last 2 minutes, tell us what you learned, 3 minutes. Invariably, to a person at every campus, the conversation, what did I learn? Well, we got about 85% through it, 80, 86, whatever it is. We ran into a couple of rabbit holes because we got some bad advice about applications or platforms. I'm getting a lot of nice feedback from the students who seem to like it, and it seems to be making a difference in terms of the learning objective. I'm hearing some interesting things from a couple of folks I know off campus who said keep them posted. I am forever indebted to Sue or Steve. Some of you are nodding already. Yes, that's the undergraduate work study student or the graduate student as essentially, a captive resource who has helped with the heavy lifting and the heavy coding. And finally, to my departmental colleagues who are here today, please remember this because I know I've fallen on a digital sword. You won't give me any credit for this in the algorithm for review, promotion, and tenure. And that's got to stop. We need to expand the algorithm for our colleagues who say, digital pedagogy is an important part of my scholarship. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Ernie Boyer on this in the 1980s. I'm not suggesting you get points in a 360 review for using Blackboard or posting a syllabus on the web. But if in fact, if part of your pedagogy and your scholarship is related to this, then we need to expand that algorithm. And unfortunately, the proclamations, and again, I'm not talking here, I want to be very clear about that, it's on tape. The proclamations of presidents and provosts about what a warm and encouraging and supportive environment Acme University is for folks who want to do technology work, too often that doesn't trickle down to deans, department chairs, and senior faculty, who are the front line of review and promotion. That's got to change. So I want to talk about visualization. Can I do this? How many of you remember the first time you touched a PC and you were not a computer science person and you had never touched a keyboard, or maybe just in a class? Can I do this? Or that sense of when it rolls into your class in front of your students and you have to keyboard and you hear them smirking in the background, the first, when that computer shows up, as it might have for many of you. Think about the Olympics as a visualization event. The groups that essentially broadcast about the Olympics, when they tell us the backstories of the athletes, they tell us about their training. They tell us about the physical work they do to master the sport. But they also talk with us about how the athletes visualize the competition, walking up to the starting block, standing in the house for the ski jump, whatever it might be. We all do visualization unconsciously. Psychologists in the room? Somebody bear me out. Is that true? Do we visualize? Thank you. Finally found an academic who can verify what I've said. Thank you, sir. We all do visualization. I think about my own career with visualization. And when I went to an event like this or a conference, the two major challenges I confronted as I think about it, one was clothing and one was content. What do I wear and what do I say? Fortunately, early in my career, visualizing myself at an event, the choices were easy. I would show up in the armor. Men wore suits. That was dictated at the time. Things have gotten a little bit different. And I had to work really hard as a young academic on my content. But it said something about me. How do I visualize myself in a group? Alternatively, thinking about being here with you today, I had to make some visualization choices. For example, I am kind of sort of an academic, so if I want to suggest that with my clothing, I would have worn sort of my informal academic regalia, tweed jacket, khaki pants, turn me around, there's a chalk stripe on the back of the jacket, right? And that would have signaled some things about I'm one of the family, I'm one of the tribe. Alternatively, on the technology side, there was a period in my life 18 years ago, I was the vice president of a now dead.com. So if I wanted to sort of signal with clothing my technology bona fides, I would be here channeling Steve Jobs in Internet War. All black, because that's how the industry works. And my last choice as I thought about what to pack in Los Angeles to be with you today was my red dress. For the record, please note the matching red shoes, age-appropriate opaque hose. Typically what happens is the women say, God, he sort of gets it, and somebody has trained him well, and the men are saying, what's he talking about? But if I stood here with you today, and it's also, sidebar as well, this is a lot more Talbots than Bloomingdale's, I think. That's what my wife tells me. But if I stood here with you wearing a red dress doing this presentation, I would feel awkward, I would feel exposed, I would feel stupid. And I think that that's the challenge many faculty have about being in front of their students. Think about assignments, PowerPoint presentations, and the smartass that I once was, and perhaps some of you were in an earlier time, that would make comments about faculty members for their demeanor and their attire. Today, those students sit in the back of the class and they hold up their screens and say, Professor Green, yo, whatever, at some point in between. Your graphics are kind of interesting, but I'm on the website of the source that you cite. Your data are 5 years old. Why is that? Or the student who comes knocking into my office or your office on Tuesday afternoon, office hours before class, and says, that article by Susan Smith was really interesting, the one that you assigned on Thursday. I read it over the weekend. In fact, I read it twice. I thought it was really great. We love it when our students read, don't we? And they want to come and talk with us about this stuff. But Well, great, I'd be happy to talk with you about the Susan Smith article. Well, there's really no reason to. Well, why are you here? Well, I just wanted to let you know, I got really interested in it. You know, you've kind of indicated that you travel a lot on weekends, you're generally not accessible, you're not all that comfortable with email, and besides, Susan Smith's email address was at the bottom of the article, so I sent her email and sent my questions to her. You sent email to Susan Smith? Yeah, and she answered. Susan Smith answered your email? She never answers mine. And yeah, so I hope this doesn't count for my grade, but Susan Smith wanted to know how you were using the article and asked us the website, you know, the URL for your syllabus and the course, but it's not online. So I hope you don't mind. I scanned the syllabus and I sent it to her. You scanned my syllabus and sent it to Susan Smith? Okay, and again, I printed this off so you could see it, but again, I hope this doesn't count on my grade. She says, your syllabus seems to be about 5 years out of date. And I probably should not have included this in the printout, but she's wondering how somebody like you gets to teach here. Our students have access to the raw content that used to be ours alone. So now we have to engage with many of them in a different way. And for many of us, that's great. And many of us, or your colleagues, are not necessarily that comfortable with it. The balance has changed in many ways. Visualization is, how do I see myself doing this stuff? How do we make it compelling? Why should I do this? What's the evidence of benefit if we do this digital pedagogy stuff? So what have we learned? Anybody teach Romance languages here? My French is based on high school, plus ça change, I believe it's the correct pronunciation. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Think about technology. The technology's gotten great. The other issues, training, user support, infrastructure, a lot of that stuff as much as it was 5, 10, 15, 25 years ago. Anybody been to Brazil? I've been fortunate to go to Brazil for a couple of trips. My Brazilian colleagues tell me that the Brazilian Portuguese version of Plus ça change is as muchas madame. That sort of translates as only the flies change. Think about that for a moment, and then I'll go to the next slide. The technological changes have been great. Think about what's in your pocket today. Think about what set people to the moon in 1969, done with slide rules. And the power of computing then compared to what we walk around with today very inexpensively. And the continuing issues about expectations, user support, all this stuff, evidence of impact, money and IT budgets. The innovation lives in an ecosystem. It's not the innovation itself, it's all the other stuff around it that we have to acknowledge as part of this. Back-end infrastructure, user support, things that supplement and supplant, alliances that add value. All these things are part of the conversation about a particular innovation in a course or in a university. The great example of this is textbooks. Any of you using OER or thinking about using open educational resources? So think about OER in this context. This is not a comparison of have you written a textbook? No. So I have an OER textbook. What's your textbook in?
Grammar.
Grammar. I have an OER textbook in grammar. You have a textbook from Acme College Publishing. We'll be neutral on this, right? Okay. Your textbook's got all kinds of stuff that the publisher has provided as added value resources, right? Test sets, instructional stuff. Tell me I'm right. This is really important, yeah? My OER book sits there alone. It's not an apples to apples comparison, it's apples to orchard, because you've got a rich orchard of stuff I don't. And the whole issue, and you've gone through a lot of QA and I have not in necessarily the same way. This is where some of the challenges are. Faculty, when we survey them about OER, intellectually it's intriguing, but they're concerned about quality, they're concerned about vetting, they're concerned about updating, they recognize the cost issues for their students, but there's also the prerogative of choice. I get to choose on these things as well. In terms of, again, this ecosystem. Too long we've had this false choice of high tech versus high touch. Anybody remember Al Gore and the internet superhighway that was going to save education? It's not the technology. And this is John Nesbitt that many of you may remember from 1982, Megatrends, high tech versus high touch. It's tech-enabled high touch. And the elements of a campus plan are straightforward. Initially, realistic definitions. Faculty recognition and reward, training and support, evidence of impact and sustained support. This is not a one-off. The financial mistake we make thinking about IT is that it's a capital cost. State of Nevada decides, and the city of Las Vegas decides to do road improvement in and around the campus. That's a 10 or a 15-year investment. You buy computers, it's like financial aid. It's gone the next year. Technology is an operating cost. It's not a capital cost. And for too long, unfortunately, we have viewed it as a capital cost, because when you go back to the Nevada legislature and you say, well, gee, thank you for the couple $1 million you gave us for UNLV for technology infrastructure 2 years ago, but we need more. They say, well, what happened to all the money you did? We gave you $2 million for the roads. The roads don't ask us for more money. Why do you need more money for technology? It's an operating cost because things change rapidly. And so what we need to understand this as tech-enabled high-tech, tech-enabled high-touch. Let me give you 3 examples. Many of you have heard about the ASU BAs for Barista program at Arizona State. They initially started with students who already had the equivalent of 2 years of college. They cherry-picked a little bit the first cohort. This program is successful not because ASU has got a great set of courses on screen. They do. What makes this work is the support infrastructure for those students beyond the screen. The counselors and academic support personnel call those students to provide assistance, advising, other kinds of resources and services. It's tech-enabled high touch. The content and the courses make a difference, but the support services are absolutely essential to the success. Georgia State, many of you may have heard, has eliminated the historic gaps that differentiate Pell Grant recipients, first-gen college students, students of color with other students. And they did it in 5 years. Gaps that sometimes would be 10, 15, 20% in terms of the arriving versus the graduating cohort. The public statement about that is that they did it with analytics. They just mapped this stuff. They got 686 different indicators and variables that they put into the data gumbo. They ran the data gumbo, and boom, they sent out a Monday morning email that says, Casey Green, you're in trouble. Because based on what we know about students like you and the academic performance and your skills and how you spend your time and all this other stuff, you're in trouble in your widgets course. But then they follow it up. They hired more than 200 people to do academic support. That's not necessarily possible for every place, but it's an essential component of it in terms of this tech-enabled high touch. A third example at Austin Community College. They took a dead mall, at one point the most popular and prestigious mall in Austin, vacated, bought the mall. They turned the bottom, equivalent of several football fields, into a math emporium. Not with classrooms, computers in rows, but computers in clusters. They're using what you use here, Alex from McGraw-Hill, for math instruction for those students. Faculty members are on the floor with the students. They're not in front of a wall lecturing. And it's made a big difference in terms of the experience of those students getting ready for math. All these are examples of tech-enabled high touch, using the technology to supplement, not supplant, the role of faculty members. We need to change the data culture. Peter Drucker, strategy, each change for breakfast. Culture, each change. The old culture used to be, what did you do wrong? How did you screw up? How did you fall short? The new question we have to ask in our conversations about data become, how do we do better? We need to begin to use data as a resource, not as a weapon. For too long, both internally in colleges and universities and externally from the regents who are in the Nevada board that's across the street and their counterparts in every other state and the accrediting agencies, data have been used as a weapon, not as a resource. How do we find our way out and do better, not what do we do wrong? Finally, oops, I lost my presentation. My apologies, let me bring this back. I pressed the wrong button. We'll edit this out of the tape, right? Two last things. So first, innovation and the fear of trying. This is on my blog in response to something last year in Inside Higher Ed. Some researchers said, well, faculty are afraid of trying. We've known that for a long time because they don't get recognized and rewarded for innovation. This is nothing new. This has been going on for decades in higher education. That's in the packet that you've got. And the real challenge is a commitment to research about pedagogy and recognition and support for faculty member. And finally, I want to talk about Machiavelli as we close. And again, political scientists in the room? Any of you sit or sleep through political science or Machiavelli? Okay. So Machiavelli, as many of you know, lived in treacherous times. You know, at times he was at the side of the prince, and sometimes the prince threw him up in the tower. And, you know, and we talk about a Machiavellian mentality. Sometimes, and that's perceived to be a negative thing. I want to talk about guidelines for Machiavellian change agents, because if we're going to have this conversation, that's what we need to be. The first guideline is concentrate your efforts. My guess is many of you have been through the Post-it exercise about how a particular event or organization or something needs to change. You cover the wall with Post-it notes. Begin to cluster them. You can't do all of them. You're lucky if you can get to do 3 of them. You need to you do triage. What can we do between now and September? What do we do between September and the following September? Everything else is sort of beyond reach, or you come back and revisit. Concentrate what you do. Second, pick issues carefully. Know when to fight. Any of you have teenagers in your homes? Any of you ever been a teenager? When my son was 13, he decided he wanted green hair. Classic opportunity for a parent to fight with a child. And in my ultimate wisdom, I wasn't that smart. I took the path of least resistance. I stood in the shower with him and poured the dye over his head twice. It didn't take. The outcome? For 2 weeks, I was okay. He even liked me. And the dye didn't take. Pick your issues. We all know when to pick your issues. That becomes an essential part of this thing. Know the history. If you don't know the history of a particular event, people like me who parachute in, walk around for a day and a half, leave you with a 5-page report. These are the 25 things that should change at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. If I don't know the backstory, all that stuff is just going to be garbage. It's just going to be garbage. And when we talk about people hitting the ground running, no, you want to hit the ground walking very fast and having a lot of walking conversations. So you know that history. So somebody doesn't say to you, yeah, we've been there, done that. You should have done your homework on these issues when we have these conversations about change. Build coalitions. Coffee and pizza are wonderful things. Find friends. Somebody's got to share your concern as opposed to you as an individual. Small groups become units. Build coalitions in terms of these conversations, to take those conversations to others and to take those conversations up. Set modest but realistic goals. You know, it sounds great to proclaim we're going to have a 25 or 40% gain in some metric. And if you fall 5% short, if you say 40, you hit 35, have you failed? Or have you just sort of fallen short a little bit? I moved to Los Angeles 40 years ago for graduate school. At that time, PSA, some of you remember PSA, the flight time gate to gate from Los Angeles to San Francisco was 58 minutes. Today it's 1 hour 45. I assure you that's not because of continental drift, right? That's because the airlines are managing expectations better that I show up 10 or 15 minutes early as opposed to being 20 minutes late. I'm not suggesting you cook your numbers. I'm suggesting you set realistic goals when you have these new initiatives in terms of and how you measure them. Data becomes essential, not after the fact, baked in as opposed to bolted on. I understand there's a lot of conversations about data here. One of the most important parts is to get agreement about what data will be used. So there's no post hoc bolting on of data as opposed to, this is what we agreed to. These are the metrics, these are the data resources we have. If we don't have those data available, how do we get them? Or do we agree that we can get by without them? This is an instance where perfect is the enemy of the good in many instances because we like the perfect. Anticipate personnel turnover. People leave. We announced a Digital Fellows project in June. Selected 31 provosts from campuses across the country. We've already had personnel turnover in 6 of those people. Some way or another, their jobs have changed for what was essentially a one-year project. So who are the key people? What is your strategy if a key person leaves? Becomes part of the Machiavellian strategy. Set deadlines, because deadlines focus the mind very much, and then work back. If we're going to hit these deadlines, how do we do that? Finally, recognize that nothing is static. Everything changes. That's my story. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
We have a little time for questions, and we prefer you use the mic since it might actually show up on the video.
And I have a request. If you ask a question, please tell me who you are and what you do. That'll feed my hyperactive inference engine inappropriately while you're asking your question. This group doesn't laugh. That's always a laugh line. You know what? I'm not working the sidebars at Las Vegas. I'm going back to LA.
I guess we have a high standard.
You have a high standard here, yeah.
Okay.
In terms
We
of
have a lot of comedy clubs here.
comedy clubs on the strip. Okay.
So somebody must have a question. Come on.
Going once? Please, you are, sir. Thank you, by the way, for being brave and courageous in front of this group.
So,
You are?
Daryl Levy, OIT.
Okay.
So what about the cost of education? I mean, there's a lot of pressure for educational institutions to make education more affordable,
Right.
and also to have more meaningful outputs from the education and students getting jobs. So how does
All right.
education?
So this, the question is, how does the cost of education play into a conversation about technology? If you're a member of the legislature in some state, you're hoping that the investments in IT bring down costs. At the same time, you have probably voted against appropriations for the state university. I want to be very clear about this. I'm not that familiar with Nevada. Colorado has gone to 5%. Maricopa Community College has been zeroed out in terms of public dollars. Lots of other states where the state appropriation that helped underwrite tuition, where decades ago or even a decade ago it might have been 30, 40%, are down to almost single digits. So for whatever the conversation is that higher education is screwing the American public, to use a technical term, because we control our destinies about college cost, a lot of that is not true. A lot of that is because states, sometimes because they have no choice, given the rising competition for public dollars, for K-12 education, for roads, for healthcare, for other parts of the infrastructure, for prisons in many states, have taken money that used to go to higher ed and have gone elsewhere, or because there's been a taxpayers' revolt, as we had in California, and I believe here as well in Nevada, in terms of limiting property taxes or sales taxes. One of the largest drivers of the rising cost is the fact that state legislatures are no longer supporting public institutions as they do. Second factor is that our costs are labor costs. And if you look at particularly public institutions historically, there's been a huge and very well documented migration to a large part-time workforce. Any of you see the Doonesbury cartoons that periodically pop up about how Doonesbury mocks academics, and particularly the sort of the Home Depot experience of part-timers who are looking for jobs? The dean drives out to the equivalent of what is sort of that Home Depot waiting bin for day labor. You know, take me kinds of stuff. And there's been a huge shift in that. That doesn't help students. That helps drives down some of the costs, but there's no continuity to that. As far as technology has not brought down our costs. It's generally. It has brought other values. How many of you remember waiting in line as undergraduates to pay the bursar for fees? The fact that you can now do tuition, textbooks, and t-shirts online, hard to monetize the value of that. You could if you wanted to say the cost of the hours, minimum wage for students and $500 an hour for the rest of you. That was a laugh line. Nobody. But there are other values of technology besides just the cost reduction in terms of the service benefits. But the assumption that technology is going to drive down costs that we have seen periodically, that we saw a huge part of this conversation in the wake of the dot-com era and sort of coming back, we just haven't seen it yet. Now there's some evidence that there's a report that just came out from the Boston Consulting Group and Arizona State University. And actually, if you go to the 2-Degree website, we did a program on this that talks about the return on investment of technology, both the academic efficacy as well as the financial. There are some other benefits. For example, you look at a place like the University of Central Florida, it was able to grow without incurring the normal physical costs it would for a physical infrastructure with its online programs. Didn't necessarily bring down other costs because of the cost of support personnel. So, you know, we need to do a better job of communicating those issues both amongst ourselves and to a larger public. That's not the answer I think you were looking for, but that's the best answer I can give you. Think about who you vote for in the next legislative election. And I'm going back to California before I get in trouble. Please, you are.
Kimberly James. I'm new faculty in the School of Music, actually.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kimberly, for asking.
Sure, thank you. So my question, you're speaking about high touch, and actually arts are extremely high touch,
Right.
because most of my instruction, for instance, is individual. And so some of our discussion in the arts is about curricular and program innovation. So do you have any suggestions there in terms of how tech or the projects you're involved in are driving curricular and program change?
My suggestion, so the question is what drives curricular change and where can you go to find good examples? Are any of you familiar with Project Merlot? So Merlot is a compendium supported by the California State University system. If you are looking for a textbook to teach widgets, if you are looking supplements in terms of the musicology course or theory course, all across the curriculum, a lot of different stuff is laid out. What faculty members at which institutions are using various resources? How are they using supplements? There's a particular widget here or supplement that applies to this part of the learning objective in different kinds of courses. It's a great, and it's a free compendium. Think of it as Yelp for higher education in one sense. There's a rubric called Courseware in Context, CICW, something like that, that lays out some other parts of this. Your best source of this is going to be your colleagues. I'm not a musicologist, I'm not a mathematician, I'm a semi-defrocked social scientist that gets to watch IT planning and policy stuff. So we see a lot of this. We're going to be aggregating some of this from this Digital Fellows project. But honestly, every discipline I know of has listservs and bulletin boards where faculty members talk about these things. That's going to be the best reference and resource that I could offer to you. Again, my apology, I suspect you were looking for a specific reference, like a citation. I don't have that. But let me extend. Music is a great place, the arts are a great place, literature is a great place in terms of thinking about what the technology has brought us. Statistics, ironically, is a great place because all of a sudden these things now become even more real in terms of taking things apart, disassembling, putting back together, having access to resources that were not readily available to students here 10 or 15 or 30 years ago. How many of you took introductory statistics as an undergraduate? Okay, I did. I never saw data in my introductory stat. It was all theory. Except for maybe we were asked to go draw histograms about bathrooms or parking or food service. But in 1969, we never touched data. It was too expensive to give us computer time. Maybe we could hand calculate standard deviations and means. Today, we look not only for a right answer, but we look for the permutations in what the data mean in a variety of different contexts. We have access to the Vatican Library and online resources, musical archives in Vienna, whatever they might be, that make it rich and engaging and hopefully sticky. I mean, that's potentially the power of some of this. Those aren't interventions, those are resources though. They complement and supplement.
One more question? Yes.
Please.
So
I'm sorry, you are?
my name is Brian Hilbert, and I run our Disability Resource Center here on campus. And my world and my interest is primarily accessibility and making sure that's done well, but maybe also that question in a broader context of leading change. So when we decide to do things that we need to do, how do we sell it to faculty partners, and how do we make sure that we get a quality implementation?
You need to focus on benefits. You need to focus on benefits for a broad audience as well as for the target audience. So, case in point to your question, how many of you watch British procedural mysteries or detective shows on Netflix or Amazon Prime? Come on.
You got some more on the come on.
All right. How many of you turn on subtitles because you can't understand the brogue when they're in Scotland? Okay? Now, this was an innovation for an audience, whether it's a foreign language or otherwise, that has brought benefits to a larger population. We have not done a good job in dealing with accessibility. Technology was supposed to change that, make it better. It has not generally. It's not just a matter of large fonts and screen readers and other kinds of things. We have to do better. IT officers know we have to do better. But again, I think that as a general approach, to me it's the same thing in talking with faculty member. What's the compelling reason to do this? What's the benefit? How does it make it better for students? How can faculty make it better for their students? How does it make it better for faculty members? If we just do an abstract argument, we're not going to get traction for these kinds of things. Okay? Does that help? Sir, you look like you had a question. I saw your hand go half up. All right, my apologies. I didn't mean to. What last, please?
I have a teacher voice. Karen Doyle, College of Education.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate you using your teacher voice. What area are you in teacher ed?
In teacher ed, I teach educational technology.
Okay, so I'm screwed. I didn't say that.
You brought up a very, very wonderful point.
Yeah.
As we talk about online course development, you mentioned the counseling and support services that need to go along with the students who take the courses.
Yes.
That opens up to us a broader area. Tell me percentage-wise, support, what kind of percentage you're looking at, or where we can find data to do that, because that's what happens. We end up with these students in our courses. We know they need more support, but don't know where to go.
Yeah, I'm not aware of hard ratios, of how many people for academic advising or other kinds of support services. Different campuses have different models. The general rule of thumb is more than we're currently doing, but that's not an answer. But let me frame this in a larger way, okay? How many of you remember New Math? Okay, Sputnik went up, New Math came down. That was the National Defense Education Act. We have to beat the Russians. And the preamble to that legislation was, let all who are able. It was driven by a meritocratic notion of, we've got to mobilize talent in the United States to beat the Russians in the Cold War. And you saw things in the late 50s and early 60s, Project Talent, the sort of the acceleration of the National Merit Semi-Finalist competition to find those able students. Everything changes in 1965, at least in a policy tone. Lyndon Johnson goes before Congress in 1965 in the sort of the kind of early part, middle part of his legislative Great Society movements for the Higher Education Act, and effectively says in the signing statement, let all who might benefit. And Lyndon Johnson was a former school teacher. He had worked with really dirt poor kids, if you read the Robert Caro biography of his life before he got involved with Congress in Texas. And the solution the feds had was, we will provide money. We'll create what today is the Pell Grant, Basic Opportunity Grant, to help underwrite the costs. And the assumption was money will solve the problem. If we can take care of the financial costs, the students will do it. We have learned in a very painful and expensive way, it's not just about money. Money is one part of the issue for first-gen students and for many other students in terms of thinking about academic success and support. We have to create this infrastructure. Many of you may have survived on your own. Many of you may recall at some point somebody touched you and gave you that necessary kind word, assistance, office hours, whatever it is. But unless we have that infrastructure, that tech-enabled high touch, we can do a lot with the tech, but it supplements, it doesn't supplant. And ratios, I don't know. I don't know that, because they're highly contextual. They're dependent institutions. Some places have more money than others to do this, but we know that they are absolutely, that support infrastructure is absolutely essential to the kind of success that many institutions are reporting. Georgia State is the best example I can cite. In 5 years, they have literally eliminated the historic gaps in the retention and graduation rates of different student populations. It's flat and it's high. It's not just, it's flat and others came down. It's stable and it's high. Everybody's gone up. And to do that in 5 years, 5 academic cohorts, is stunning. The public statement was, it was analytics. You dug deep into it, they built this inclusive, the support system that was driven by and informed by analytics. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Green's going to stick around for another presentation at 2:30. On some of your tables coming around, there's a list of all of the titles from starting in 1994 through 2016 of the campus computing reports that he's been doing. It's almost 30 years worth of collecting data. So if you would like to spend some time talking more about all of that, you can look at those titles, see if there's any interesting questions. It is a question and answer session.
Yeah, it's PowerPoint free, and I'm so relieved you explained what the paper was. I thought you were passing out evaluation forms.
No.
And I was going to tell everybody just mark to the left, to the right.
So take a look, see if you want to stick around. As soon as you sign up for the second session, we're going to take a little break, let everybody get a bio break. Let Dr. Green get a little rest here, get some water. Let's thank him for the first session.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Questions up front here, and what we do is give a little bit of a break, and also help you stick around. And I think they're bringing some more